Yes, hello and welcome. This is Dr. John Mason. I am the founder and main facilitator of Masters of the Journey, and tonight we're going to have a special conversation. Yes, we're going to be telling your story. We have several members that are going to be talking a little bit about experiences that they've had where guidance has changed their life. Obviously, we're recording this in March of 2019. So hello and welcome once again. This is, again, Dr. John Mason, and I have with me Sally and Paula, and we're going to trade stories tonight about the times when things, guidance or incidents have occurred that have sort of either been a learning experience or maybe even a place where we had a life-changing experience. So we've talked about this, and Paula is going to lead us off with at least one of her short stories. So Paula, what story do you want to tell us tonight?
Well, you know, when I was thinking about this topic, I was trying to, I was kind of thinking like there's a couple of ways that I receive guidance, and sometimes I just think I'm getting it from a part of me that just, it might be my intuition or something, and sometimes I think I might be receiving it from, you know, maybe like a spirit guide or, you know, a teacher helper or something. So this story is just basically something that I acted upon my intuition when I think it was my intuition. It's not anything that's really earth-shattering, but I just remember this was back when I was in my early 20s, and I worked in the airlines, and so I belonged to this club. It was called the Interline Club, and they used to have gatherings every so few months, and they would have, you know, people would get together from different airlines, and they would, you know, sometimes, you know, give away passes and things like that. So leading up to that, you know, on the day that was going to happen, I happened to be visiting some friends, and we were all sitting there together, and I think we were having dinner actually, and it was, but it's still pretty, like late afternoon, early evening, but it was still pretty early. And I was with a whole bunch of friends, and at one point I told them, I have to go. I have to go and get up and go to this party because I'm going to win tonight. I'm going to win something. I just know it. And I got up from being around all of my friends, and I went to this Interline Club meeting, and I won 3 times that night. And I don't usually win stuff, so it wasn't like I'm always really lucky. That doesn't usually happen to me. So I kind of think that time, you know, my guidance came from some intuition. It didn't change my life in a huge way, except I did get some airline passes, so I did get some trips out of it.
So that's what you won. You won airline passes.
Mm-hmm.
So where'd you go to? Anything place that became then significant?
You know, now that I think of it, I think I did get a pass to fly to go down to Mexico. And when I got there, I actually went up to the mountains, up to Tasco, where the silver mines are, and I just had a great time. I really liked the energy of being up in the mountains. I hadn't really thought that I'd received any great insight. I was pretty young then, but it was just interesting how that happened.
I was out of the blue and kind of just followed your intuition.
Yeah.
So it can be a small thing or it can be a pretty major thing. When I share one of my stories, it was a pretty major thing.
Yeah.
Because I think that the listener or the viewer, when they find this videotape, it can change your perspective. And what I'm really looking for is that people start paying attention to that small voice that's often within you, and it's telling you something that may not even make sense. And yet when you follow that, it becomes something that was the right path for you to travel. So thanks for starting us off, Paula. Sally, did you want to jump in with a story now, or should I jump in with mine?
Whichever you'd like.
well, if you're anxious to do it, you can go. Otherwise, I'll be anxious to do mine.
Okay.
Okay. So with that, you're going to tell your story, or should I tell mine?
I'll go ahead.
All right. Let me take mine. This is one of the bigger things that happens, and the background on my story is that I was married for almost 28 years, and my wife got a terminal diagnosis about 8.5 years before she passed. And so I thought, I had a pretty good chance to prepare for that. And of course, I didn't know what to expect, and there was a huge vacuum. So about a year and 2 months after she passed, I decided I needed to leave the house and the situation that I was in. I knew I needed to hit the road and perhaps go find a different place to live. And so I loaded up in the car. I was living in Oak Harbor on Whidbey Island in the Pacific Northwest. And I traveled back to California, which is where I had come from. And I visited with some friends and dawdled around for a few weeks and wound up making it down to visit a friend in Bisbee, Arizona, which is right on the border with Mexico and southern Arizona. And there was parts of that story that were really good, but I want to get to the crux of what we're talking about. I came back to Tucson, and I started doing something called couch surfing, which is on the computer you can find people's houses to stay at, and you could basically stay for free. But I thought I might move to that area, so I wanted to get to know some locals, and I wanted to see what Tucson was like. And I was guided to go to Arizona. I was guided to join couch surfing. And about 2 days into my visit in Tucson, I get an email from a woman, and the email said, "I just joined couch surfing. I read your profile. We have a lot in common. I live in North Tucson. If you need a place to stay, you can stay at my house." And I just had this feeling in my gut saying, where this was weird. Where did this come from? Because what profile did she read, and why do we have stuff in common? I didn't understand. So I got in touch with her, and I said, I don't need a place to stay, but why do you say we have stuff in common? And she said, of course, you always meet people like this. She says, I've been a psychic for 25 years, and I read your profile. And I said, well, okay. I said, I'm going to be in North Tucson tomorrow. Maybe we can have lunch together. She said, oh, good. Where are you going? I said, well, I'm going up to Marival, which is a resort. I was going to go look at that because I was planning on possibly doing an executive retreat, and I was looking at resort properties. She said, as if I would know, she says, oh, Marival's in my backyard. She said, I live in the Eagle Crest development. Like, I don't know North Tucson, and I don't know the Eagle Crest development, but in Oak Harbor, I lived on Eagle Crest Drive. I said, uh-oh, this is getting very weird. I said, let's meet for lunch. So the next day we met in a strip mall in a Greek restaurant. We went in a Greek restaurant. Let me just do something here. And we met in a Greek restaurant, and we talked for about an hour, and we went back and forth, and she told me her story, and I told her my story, and there wasn't any magic happening. And I really didn't think much was going on. So after about an hour, I just stood up, took the check, and was going to walk out. I was going to pay the check and walk out. And she said to me, oh, by the way, your wife wants me to tell you something. So I kind of just sat back down in the chair and kind of pinned against the wall, didn't know what to expect. And the first thing that this woman said, and she didn't know my wife, she knew my wife had passed, but she didn't know my wife. The first thing she said was, your wife wants you to know that she's beautiful again. And nobody knew my wife like I knew my wife, and she had just enough insecurity and vanity. That would have been the first thing she would have said to me. And I really got a feeling that my wife was in the room speaking to me through this psychic. The next thing that the psychic woman said to me was, your wife wants you to know that she's in a better place, and it's bigger and better than you could ever imagine. And again, I was taken aback because this woman didn't know. But every day since she had passed, I said a prayer, I hope you're in a better place. And those were the words that came back to me. And when she said, I'm in a place that's bigger and better than you could ever imagine, I knew what that was. I mean, I remembered from having a kind of a near-death experience that the higher realms, as Paula would talk about, or some people would define it as heaven, or whatever. I understood what that feeling was, to be in a better place that's bigger and better than you could ever imagine in the three-dimensional body that you're in. I'm not an envious person, but I had a touch of envy there. I was saying, I said to myself, I wish I was there, because I knew how pleasant that situation was. And then the psychic continued to channel this information for my wife, and I learned about my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and my stepson, and it went on for an hour. And everything was amazing that this woman would never have known anything about, and it all just came up. Amongst other things, she mentioned that my sister-in-law, who kept waiting for an appearance from my wife, had never been directly confronted by a spirit or a ghost, but had been confronted by butterflies and hummingbirds and stuff like that. And she had never gotten that was my wife appearing to her in those situations. And I knew that my wife appears like that because I had that experience, and I knew that my wife was at least with me, if not trying to communicate with me. So at the end of this hour of being pretty much knocked back into my chair, I said, you know, I think I was guided to drive 2,500 miles just to come down to Tucson to meet you so that you could tell me this. And I think my wife set this whole thing up. And she just shook her head and said, yes. And I walked out. I've never spoke to that woman again, but I was definitely, my life was changed. And I got on the phone immediately with my sister-in-law, and she and I have had these conversations for the last, 6 years since that happened. And my wife has showed up, and that guidance that took me to hear that directly from this woman took all of the mystery and the guesswork out of it. And it didn't change my opinion on death and dying, because I sort of already had a good feeling about that, but it was so powerful to know that basically my wife was still around and protecting me and there to guide me and to give me information that I'm supposed to share that, even like in this format. I'm supposed to be talking about it to change people's perspective on what their lives can be like and how guidance can appear and do some pretty amazing things. So that's the first part of that story. And if you're just viewing this, you can't ask me a question, but does anybody on the call want to ask me anything about that? I'll take that as a no. So how about it, Sally? Do you have a story that you want to share?
Well, yours is much better.
I've got it's a good story, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's not subtle or anything. There's no guesswork in that one. So Any does it yeah, do you want to share, Sally, or should we have Paula tell her next story?
Oh, have Paula tell her next story.
Thank you. Paula, let's have another story from you.
Okay, so my first story had to do with what I think would be more like an intuition kind of guidance, like some guidance coming from me. But then I think there's also other kinds of guidance, like maybe guidance from if we have helpers, in our lives that kind of help to guide us. Like you were talking about your wife, and you feel like she's still around, and she might inspire you some ways or other, just by her presence. And I have experiences like that. I guess it was probably about 20 years ago. I started meditating, and I was going through a big major change in my life. It was pretty, traumatic for me. It was pretty chaotic, emotionally chaotic. But I really felt, again, that it was something that I really had to go through. I really had to do that. I had to make those major changes. And I knew it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be like a walk in the park. And I don't know why why I would have wanted to make that change, knowing it was going to be, pretty challenging. But there was that inner guidance that, yeah, I absolutely had to do that. And I felt that was really coming from me. It was, and I don't know, it's almost like an alarm went off, and it was time for me to do that. I don't know if that was something I decided before I was born or what. But what was interesting is that it led me to learn about meditation. And when I started meditating, after about a year, I started noticing that I would feel other kind of like spirit guides around me, like etheric beings around me. And since my meditations were always really centered on the qualities of love and those higher qualities, I was feeling that from them. I felt that was attracting them, beings that feel that way. And so I felt like, a lot of love. I felt, coming from them. I felt really secure and safe with them around. And at first I didn't feel like they were there for me. I just noticed they were there. But then I thought, well, what would happen if I started talking to them? And that's when it got really interesting. And they started being helpful. Like if I had some questions about something, or, and I would ask them, what about this or what about that, or how do I deal with this person or that person? They would always give me an answer almost like a grandparent would. It was a lot of wisdom in it. And so I found that really refreshing, and it made me feel much, have a deeper perspective towards life. So kind of fast forward, at some point, I had a job, and that job ended. And so I had to, I found another job. It was kind of a part-time job somewhere. And they kept telling me that they were going to guide me towards a new career that I would find very rewarding and very satisfying. And they would take care of everything. And they told me just to be patient and that it was coming. And finally, and they told me that for about a year. And there was no doubt that they were really insistent about that this thing was happening. And all of a sudden, after a year, I was working as an artist. This opportunity fell in my hands, like right out of the sky, it seemed like. And I was offered an opportunity to move out of state and work for an art studio designing stained glass windows. And hear this was for churches, new churches. And I'm not a particularly religious person. And honestly, I don't really spend a lot of time going to churches, going to church, especially at that time. I mean, I might have a spiritual group that I would see, quite a bit. But I didn't feel like I was doing it because I was a fervent religious person. I was more spiritual. So when I received that, when I went for the interview, um, they called me back about a day later. I drove out of state, came back, and a day later they offered me the job. They paid for me to move. They paid my move. They helped me find a place to stay. Everything was taken care of, just like they said. And then when I started working, I would get inspired by my guides and helpers, and I would start creating these windows, and they were right there with me the whole time. It was effortless. It was really amazing. So that's my story that I can say that really kind of put me on a different path. And eventually ended up with my own stained glass business, and now I still do some stained glass. So,
Well, it took them a year to get all these pieces in place, though, huh?
well, the reason it took a year is I was replacing somebody that was going to college, and she was working part-time at the studio, and so I had to wait for her to finish school and graduate, and she just had a year left, and so I ended up basically replacing her. She left after she graduated.
Mm-hmm. Good story. Good story. Well, thank you for sharing that part of guidance that took you into did you say a different state?
Yes, I even moved out of state, and they paid for it. They paid for everything. And I had never done stained glass before. I have to say that I'd never had anything to do with stained glass.
Really out of the blue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was talking with Sally before we started the recording, and she came to Bellingham from out of state. You came to Bellingham from out of state. Mm-hmm. I came from Bellingham from Whidbey Island, but it was really out of the blue that made me move up here. And guidance definitely got me to Bellingham. So it's probably the next part of my story. So Paula, if you're done, I'll start adding to my story. Okay. And if Sally wants to join in after I've finished my Bellingham story, then that she can. So we're in Bellingham, Washington, for you that might be watching this. Behind me is a sunset at Taylor Dock, Bellingham Bay. And I was on Whidbey Island. I said my wife passed away, and then it took me 3 years. I went on that trip about 14 months after she passed, and then it took me about 3 years to figure out how to sell my house and get out of Whidbey Island, and I didn't know where I was going. I hadn't decided, and I met a woman in Bellingham who decided that we were going to be life partners, and I signed up, and she helped me move out of my house and sell my house and move into Bellingham. And one of the things that we had talked about was starting a spiritual community called Masters of the Journey, which is kind of what we're doing here today, which is an organization that's designed for people to tell their stories. It's not a religious organization, but it is a community where people support one another. And we try to work on learning our lessons by telling the stories or whatever wisdom or challenges we've been through. And it can benefit the people that are listening because there may be a piece of information that they needed to hear that they were using in that part of their life or at some other point in the future. So I moved up to Bellingham, and I began to connect with all kinds of people, including the people at the Unity Spiritual Center, and started studying spirituality at a conscious level, because I also was not a religious person and not a church person, and I didn't have the credentials to stand in front of a room and tell people what what spirituality was all about. And yet, I've been doing it for 3.5 years, and I've really learned a lot. I'm supposed to be standing in front of the room and organizing meetings. It's really been something that I was guided to do. And getting back to my wife actually guided me into relationship with the woman who brought me to Bellingham. That's my feeling, and I don't think I'm the only one that thinks that there was not a big hand of support and guidance that got me here. So it's pretty interesting experience, and I'm glad to be here. And I don't think it's an uncommon story. The 3 people on this call tonight have all been guided to be to Bellingham, and I don't know that any of us, when we were younger, ever thought that being in Washington, let alone being in the northwest tip of it in Bellingham, Washington, is where we were going to end up. So it's again, it's a pretty interesting story out of the blue. Sally, do you want to mention anything about you being guided to get to Bellingham?
Sure.
What happened? How did you get here?
Okay. Well, first, I probably should say I was widowed a little over 4 years ago, and I lived in northwestern Pennsylvania at that time. Just a few months after I lost my husband, I lost that job that I thought I would retire with, and I ended up in Ohio, and I was just there for 3 years. But while I was in Ohio, I went to every class that I could find, and there are tons of spiritual people in Ohio. And I have a very good friend that channels. I have friends that are psychics and healers and tarot card readers and quantum touch, you name it, everything. And I took advantage of everything that I could. Learned as much as I could, and was extremely frustrated because working on trying to meditate, and I wasn't able to do anything myself, and yet I knew I was supposed to. And then I lost my job last summer. I put my house on the market. It sold within 3 days for a whole bunch more than I thought I would get out of it. I had had a psychic tell me the very day that I lost my job that I was going to be so happy that this had happened, that I was going to Washington. This was, so I know I was all guided. This was all meant to be. So I put my stuff in storage and put my dog in the back seat and drove across the country by myself. I didn't even stop anywhere. I would pull over in a rest stop and sleep for a couple hours, wake up and start driving again. I never even got a room. And as soon as I got here, I found a psychic here and went to her, and she told me that I was here collecting puzzle pieces. And actually, it was really interesting because she's giving me this reading. She says, "Oh, and I'm one of them." But there's something here in the Pacific Northwest that I'm getting downloads, and I'm a light. There's something special about my DNA, and I'm a light, and I know I am here for a major purpose. I did make a trip down to Mount Shasta soon after I came here because she told me that was one of my puzzle pieces. I needed to go there to get some more downloads. So, you know, I know there's more to come, and it's going to be soon. I totally guided this whole thing, the losing the job and coming here. I went to Mexico for Christmas, and now I'm still working on being able to hear my guides myself, and I think I just don't pay enough attention. But I kept getting emails about, there was a time period about health insurance. I had no health insurance. They wanted me to pay something, 800 something a month for me to get health insurance. So I just opted to go without it. And I just had this feeling, I've got to do something about that right before I went to Mexico. So I went online and because I have no income, I got that free insurance. So I go to Mexico, and as soon as I get there, I break my ankle. So boy, I guess I needed health insurance pretty badly. I'd be paying for everything out of pocket. And while I was there, something happened with the girl next door to the lady I was staying with, and I was able to help them out a lot, and they helped me and helped me get back out of Mexico so I could drive myself back home with a broken ankle. It was a fun trip. But yeah, it's all divinely, it's all planned. Told me apparently even my higher self, this whole thing breaking my ankle was all planned ahead of time. So I'm just waiting to know what's coming next.
That's an amazing story. And you know what how important it is to hear that we're not always led by guidance into the easiest of circumstances, but we're supposed to learn even from those very difficult, challenging things. And somehow it makes us better or stronger, or gives us tools, like you said, pieces that maybe we can find a way of being of service in the future because we've been through an experience like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you stop and think about it, you lost your husband. I mean, using the word "lost your husband" is kind of a weird thing to say. Your husband passed away 4 years ago. My wife passed away now 7 years ago. And if anybody were to ask me about that, I would say it was a brutal experience being with her for 8.5 years while she was going through her cancer treatment. It was horrible to feel that vacuum in my life that it happened when she wasn't physically there anymore. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. I learned so much about compassion. I learned it made us closer because we were a team working while she was ill. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but as hard as it was, I feel like I am a different, maybe stronger, maybe better person from having gone through those experiences.
Absolutely.
So, and when you said you lost your job, but the psychic said you'd really be happy because it wasn't the job for you, how many times have we lost relationships or jobs or had a sickness or illness, and somehow it triggered something that we needed to experience, and it wasn't fun, but we somehow benefited from that. We're all made stronger by going through those difficult times.
Yes.
So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Sally. And I'm sure that within the next 47 seconds, I'm going to know exactly why you came to Bellingham, and I'll be able to tell you.
I would sure appreciate that. Well, yeah, I think I got the why part. I just need to know what's coming next.
Yes, it would really be great if there was a script and like in a movie, and the actors knew exactly what their lines were going to be and where we were going. And we all are actors, don't get me wrong, but it may not be written down somewhere where it's as obvious as a script for a movie would be. And you know, that's one of the things that makes it so exciting. I have a mentor who's a very wise person. Her name is Paula Forget. Oh, wait a minute, she's on the call. And she constantly reminds me about appreciating every moment in life and finding the joy and looking for the most beautiful things that we can. We may never go down this particular path again. And I'm paraphrasing what she says because she says things much better than me, right, Paula?
If you say so. You're better at saying them, though.
Paula, did you mention to everybody that you've written a book by any chance, just for the interest?
Oh.
It's sitting on my shelf over there.
Yeah, I wrote a book, which is why I ended up in Bellingham.
Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. You came to Bellingham because you wanted to write a book.
Well, it was written, but I needed to publish it, and I was scared to publish it where I came from. Well, I wasn't. Actually, I was just scared to publish it. Didn't matter where I lived.
Yeah.
But I thought people would be really friendly here, and they'd be supportive, and I got over being scared about it. And
Can you hold up a copy of your book and give us just a little bit of information about it? Guided to the Higher Realms. Oh,
yeah.
Paula, you have to talk so that's on. You hold it up and talk so it's on the screen.
Here's the Vanna White version. Guided to the Higher Realms, a personal journey of ascension through meditation. And there's me down here, going to the higher realms. And
okay.
If you've ever heard of people, they talk about coming out of the closet. That was my big coming out of the closet moment.
Would you please explain that, because coming out of the closet means different things to different people.
I know. It's out of the spiritual closet. Yeah, I had all of this stuff going on for, 20 years. And then finally I thought I have to talk about it. I didn't really I didn't normally talk about that because it was a little out there. So I thought I'm gonna move to the West Coast. Because people are pretty open-minded there, and I'll feel more comfortable if I do that.
So people don't really know what's in the book, so I'm going to just mention a couple of things. Paula handed her book to me more than a year ago, and I read the book, and it's about her meditations, where she is actually guided to above the body, the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th chakras, up into higher realms of the divine spirit. It's actually above heaven, and for me it was jaw-dropping, because I did not realize that stuff like that was even possible or existed. I had never heard of that. And for those of you who wonder why I believe that, is I know Paula, and Paula doesn't lie, and Paula doesn't exaggerate, even though the stuff is beyond belief. So it's a spectacular book. And thank you, Paula, for sharing that information with us. I know that it may just be the foundation for even more books that are talking about consciousness that you've gathered over the last 20 years.
Oh, well, thank you, John. I guess one thing I kind of wanted to bring us back to guidance, and, I've had some times, like a couple of times, that really major sense that I have to do something. And the thing that's interesting about getting that feeling, and I think a lot of us sometimes get that feeling, is the way I describe guidance. It's kind of like having like a real gut feeling, that like an impending feeling that you absolutely have to do this. And the whole time you have a choice. You always have a choice. You don't have to do anything. I mean, you can always decide, no, I'm not going to do that. But for some reason, you choose to go ahead and to walk into the unknown, and like Sally was saying, like she's moved to Bellingham and she's not sure what's here for her, but there's something here for her. And like you came here and I ended up here. But when you get that kind of guidance, it's kind of like it's like a leap, like a leap of faith, like I'm just going to go for it, and who knows what's going to happen. And, like, an example I could give that happened really early on, in my early 20s, I had met somebody that, we had everything in common. Like we get along really well. We communicate really well. Everything is great. We like the same things. Everything feels right. And I had to choose at that moment. I was kind of pressed because I was a Canadian and he was an American. And if we were going to be together, there was only, we basically had to, he asked me to marry him. And when he asked me to marry him, it was like this phrase came across my mind. Just, I don't know where it came from, but it said, basically the phrase was, if you don't marry him, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. It's like all one long word, if you don't marry him, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. I've never heard that ever in my life before or since. And so I did. And everything, and I don't think things could have been more perfect. It was just amazing.
Yeah, I know that it really started. I've heard a lot of the story. You guys did some incredible, amazing things together.
And spiritually, just like I can say, out of the blue, we had several awakenings together. And we didn't see it coming. We had no clue that would ever happen. So.
We've got a lot of stories going here. I want to throw one thing in, because you said you wrote a book because you were guided to do that. You were guided to go into meditation. You were guided to have the experiences, and then you were guided to write about it.
Yeah.
And when I was moving to Bellingham in the middle of 2015, I had written a blog at the Stress Education Center, and I put my blog on the website, and it was mostly about stress management and some personal ranting about things that were going on in my life. And in the summer of 2015, I'd say 95% of the blogs, which come out every week, became spiritual in nature. The lessons that I was learning and things that were being channeled and guided through me onto paper, well, not onto paper, but onto the internet. If anybody's viewing that and they want to see that, that's at the Stress Education Center's website, Stress Education Center, and it's dstress.com. That's just the letter D in front of the word stress.com. And at the top, there's a listing for blog. And the blogs have nothing to do at this point with doing straight traditional stress management. Every single one of them is a message that I'm supposed to write about. And I come up with a topic, I don't know where, and I look, and there's 5 paragraphs, and some of that stuff is pretty good. There's some really good ones, and I say, I wonder where that came from. And so at the Stress Education Center's blog, it's filled with stuff that I really believe is guided and channeled. And I really love it. It's a blessing for me to be able to put those kind of things into words. And I can even get Paula to read them every now and then. Right, Paula?
I read them every week.
Yeah, the one this week was about intention. Did you see that one yet?
No, I haven't read it yet. I just got it.
Okay, well, they come out on Thursdays. Thank you for reading them, Paula, by the way. So,
well, a lot of them are very amusing because you have a good sense of humor too.
Oh, that's right. That's right. There's a lot of funny bits in them. Yeah. And it's not subtle at all. So,
no. Okay, give me the website again.
The website is www.dstress, which is just the letter D in front of the word stress.com. dstress.com, and then at the top of the page, it says blog, and there's more than 200 of my weekly blogs, and most of them that are written in the last 3 years have had a message that was based on something that I was been learning or connecting with and channeled on spirit or metaphysics or health and psychology, but from the spiritual perspective. So, Sally, I'm gonna put us on pause for just a minute, and then we'll talk about whether we're going to continue the recording or whether we're going to do a sign off. All right?
Okay.
So this is John Mason. We're signing off for tonight. Thank you for joining us to hear our stories for tonight. If you want to find out more about Masters of the Journey, this is the information page where we have a Facebook, Masters of the Journey. We have a website, mastersofthejourney.com. And probably if you're viewing this, you know that we're on the YouTube channel, and our YouTube channel is, of course, Masters of the Journey. We have a number of interviews with people who have had near-death experiences or have had spiritual epiphanies or who are working in the field, and they may be resources that would be useful for you. So I encourage you to look around and see if you can find us. Thank you so much for your time and your attention, and I hope that you come back and visit with us again. If you have a story to tell, please contact us through the Facebook page or through the website, and I would love to do an interview with you and get your information recorded so it works as perspective for other people who might be seeking information, guidance, and wisdom. You're a blessing. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you another time. Be well.